Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Isla Barker. On the programme this week, we are delighted to be joined by Michelle Campbell, the newly elected MSP for Renfrewshire North and Cardonald. Good afternoon, Michelle.
Hi there, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you too. And we are also delighted to welcome Huw Marshall from Talking Wales. Good afternoon, Huw.
Good afternoon, Prynhawn da.
To start, we will begin with our Ukraine update. Russia's state nuclear energy company Rosatom has claimed a Ukrainian drone had struck the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency on Saturday said it has been informed by the Zaporizhzhia plant that a drone had struck a turbine building at the site. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi expressed serious concern about the reported incident. The IAEA's team has requested access to examine the affected turbine building firsthand. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant was captured by Russia in March 2022 and remains close to the front line in the southeastern Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia region. Kyiv military have called Russian claims as another propaganda ploy. In a statement, the Ukrainian military said, at the relevant section of the front line, there was no active fighting during the incident and no weapons were used. Ukrainian drones hit Russian oil facilities overnight into Saturday, causing fires and damage in the latest attack on Moscow's oil industry. On social media, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky referred to the Krasnodar attack and said, "We are rightfully bringing the war back to where it came from." Ukrainian professional tennis player Alexandra Oleinikova, an outspoken critic of Russia's war against Ukraine, on Saturday criticized Russian tennis players at the French Open about their stance on the war. After her third-round exit at the French Open, Oleinikova lost in straight sets to Russia's Diana Schneider. The Ukrainian said players from Russia were allowed to participate in international tournaments, even though they openly took part in events sponsored by Russian companies linked to the war effort, or even after what she said was promoting the positions of Russia in relation to the war on social media. Now for our Middle East update. 929 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the start of the October 2025 ceasefire, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023 to 72,938. Israel is increasing its occupation of Gaza while it prevents return and rebuilding. It is doing the same in Lebanon. As negotiations for a ceasefire in Iran continue, Trump continues attacks and the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. So, Michelle, there was talk of bills going up with the price of oil and the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. So, are there any plans for relief or intervention at this time?
I think that the First Minister's been very candid about the need for Scotland to have more power, to have that control. Obviously, we had the debate in the Parliament, which there was a lot of really good contributions. If people haven't had the chance to see that, I would highly recommend that. It's a major frustration point, I think, for the SNP and government, because there are, as ever, plans to help people, help local communities, and it's been stalwarted by the efforts of the UK government unwilling to actually do what is right for the people of Scotland.
Thank you. And Huw, are you aware of any intervention or relief for people in Wales?
Not at the moment. Like I say, it does cause concern, about the situation being ongoing, and it's just a very difficult situation.
Thank you. And then for the Middle East, how do you see the next few weeks in this conflict playing out?
I think, unfortunately, with the conflict as it has been through the time of it existing, I think it's important to call it what it is. It's a war. I think that critics like to call it a conflict because it makes them feel comfortable. There's a moral repugnancy attached to the behaviours, and I think that it's really important that we don't lose sight of the human aspect on this. That people's lives aren't just affected; people are losing their lives. And it's traumatic, it's horrific. So although there's a cost to us as general society for all the other things that that you've spoke about, that human element is really important to keep hold of. And when you're dealing with people and they're angry and they react in anger, that can be really unpredictable. So as much as we, as a people and in Scotland, I think that the First Minister's given really, really strong language and support to make it very clear about where those lines are. We need the UK government to step up and be a lot stronger as well, to make it very clear that it's not just that we find the acts that happen to be irresponsible, that we condemn it. These are, turns of phrase that we hear all the time. Now it becomes normalised language, whereas actually using your power to make a difference, to stop wars, is a far more effective tool. And I would like to see a stronger approach in that respect.
So, with a stronger approach to opposing this war or even helping end it, how do you think that could go? What could the UK or the Scottish government do?
Well, Scotland has always been a conduit for conversation and going about peaceful ways in order to find solutions to where those conflict points are. I think that having conversations where it could lead to peace talks, where there's actually meaningful actions. It's all very well to say there's a ceasefire, but then if it's broken, but then, I don't think that anyone's surprised when they hear that a ceasefire has been broken or there's been a ceasefire called, but then there's been another action that's happened. I think there's a need for adults in the room. It's not just about the vested interests of that war, it's about the people that they represent. That they're supposed to have the best interests for. And I think that globally, we need more women in the conversation. I think there's too many men around the table, and absolutely honestly, I think that when women come together, we're a force for reckoning, for positivity, and for actually getting to the grit of the issue and finding those solutions.
Thank you. And Huw, how do you think the UK government can intervene in this war and bring it to an end?
By speaking out against it. There was a very interesting clip on social media shared showing Starmer's reaction to Russia, their attacks on the Ukraine, and sort of the language that he was using there was very strong and very forceful. But when it came to talking about Israel's actions, there's just no sort of comparison. The fact that what's going on now, especially in southern Lebanon, it's an invasion, basically. And the Israeli government are able to just act with complete impunity. They're still sort of in lockstep with the USA. The Iran situation is ongoing and is a mess. And Netanyahu is using what's going on in Iran as a deflection to continue with basically what is genocide. They still won't let Western reporters into the Gaza Strip. The reports coming in of escalation within the Gaza Strip. People being killed on a daily basis, and the world just stands by and sort of idly sort of looks on. It's a shame, and it's something that humanity needs to sort of look at and start wondering, what is going wrong here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then with the negotiations and peace talks, there have been reports from the United States that they are very close to a deal, and then they retract their word and say that there is still work to be done. So how do we know what is true in these negotiations, and who could we trust at this time?
We can't trust anybody. Trump just lies. That's all he does. He lies on an industrial scale. He's been saying there's going to be a deal, very close for weeks. When he does make announcements, it does seem to be in order to manipulate sort of financial markets and the price of oil. And it looks like people within his inner circle are profiting from that as well. There were talks. There was mention yesterday about Jared Kushner. Part of the deal is looking at sort of real estate deals in Iran. Everything is about some sort of way of Trump and his cronies making money. There's nothing about peace involved here. I'm surprised that Trump will try and sort of make a great deal of ending a war that that he started. It's cost the Americans a lot of money. It's cost American lives, and it's having a huge impact on the global economy. It's having a huge impact on the economy in the United States. And people, I think, are finally, when it comes down to Trump, seeing through his nonsense. And when people are affected in the pocket, then that's when people start taking action. But you can't take it Iran's word. You can't take Trump's word. Who knows what's going on? we wait with bated breath to hear another one of Trump's long, rambling Truth Social posts.
Thank you. And moving on to the SNP. With Peter Murrell pleading guilty to embezzling over £400,000 from SNP party funds on Monday, the media and opposition parties are in meltdown, demanding inquiries and blaming the SNP, who by any definition of embezzlement are the victims. So, Michelle, do you think it is fair for the opposition parties in Holyrood to demand an inquiry at this time?
To be absolutely blunt, no. I think that this election, they have learned nothing. When I was out knocking doors, I was out every day. I've been out for months. This was not what people were talking about. No. People were talking about the cost of living. People were talking about the fact that they want to be able to get more access to the NHS on their doorstep. People want to be able to have better outcomes for employment, to have more sense of security around their housing. To waste public money on inquiries where there's been a legal case made, it has went through its due processes, which is an independent process, is them just trying to do political score points, of which the public are not buying it. They will not buy this. They're only speaking to their own bases, of which I would even go as far as to say that some of those bases will be embarrassed by what was on show this week. I mean, to have a First Minister's questions be absolutely dominated by the raining on to the First Minister on a matter in which he answered in the first question, how's that holding the Scottish Government to account when you're wasting all that time, when it was made very clear from the off that we are the victims in this situation? I'm angry. The First Minister has made it very clear he's really angry and upset by it as well. And I think that as our party leader, he's actually been really, really effective at making that very clear from the off. And I think that it's a disservice, given that we are in public service, for our time to be wasted in such a way when there's so many more important things that affect everyone's day-to-day life that people want us to be talking about right now.
Thank you. So you would say an inquiry is completely unnecessary?
I think it's completely unnecessary. I think that there's been a due process. We are waiting to find out. Obviously, there's some parts that are not concluded, so it would be appropriate to comment on. But, guilt has been admitted. We've had an inquiry that is, the police have done their investigation, a thorough investigation that's went on for years. And the courts have had their say on it. So it's not what people want. People want us to be focused on delivering for them and their outcomes in lives. It's not public money that's involved in this situation. As a party, people will have their views and opinions and will be angry and upset in various ways and have the absolute right to having those views and opinions. I do not see what the added benefit of having an inquiry will actually do for the public purse and what are public priorities at this time.
Thank you. And Huw, would you agree with Michelle? Do you think it is fair for opposition parties to demand an inquiry?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. If there needs to be an inquiry, it should be an internal one with the SNP, because they're the ones who've been defrauded. And as you say, it's just political point scoring, opportunism. You could almost sense the disappointment that when Murrell entered a guilty plea. You can imagine that the SNP bad brigade had been looking forward to months of, sort of discussions in court, sort of creating clickbait for, online, and countless interviews and discussions. Obviously, as Michelle was saying, criminality's been admitted. The crime was against the SNP. It wasn't committed by the SNP. And it's just complete nonsense.
Thank you. And Michelle, you asked to add one more thing?
Yeah, just to add to that in terms of Huw actually added into the mix there about internal processes is absolutely right. And there has been a full governance review. I served on NEC during part of that time frame, of which there has been absolute robust sort of looking at that, and I think that we are now in a healthier position as a party already. So I think these are the things that are omitted from the reporting in the press as well, because they sensationalised a woman who has not done any wrongdoing, and putting blame of a woman's behaviour on what was a man's action, and I think that's really important, and I think the viewers will recognise that once again, a man does something wrong, commits a crime and they're trying to hold a woman to account for those behaviours, and I think that is morally repugnant.
So an example of very blatant misogyny there.
Absolutely.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Now moving on to Tony Blair. Tony Blair arose from his crypt again this week in an attempt to suck the blood from the Labour leadership contest. He called for an end to net zero policies and advocated for more fossil fuel extraction in the UK. This makes us wonder who his financial backers are. So, Michelle, is Tony Blair relevant in this political age?
No. Once again, I can be quite blunt in my viewpoint about that. And I appreciate that some people might think that the next word say it's like going on about the same old thing, but it's still relevant, which is the Iraq War. He lied to the people. He said, no, give assurances. No, there is going to be weapons of mass destruction here. He made decisions out of selfish endeavour, and I feel that we still pay the price for that if we look at the uncertainties that do exist in the Middle East. As a result of that, I think that it was laughable that he was made a convoy for anything. When you look at sort of the way things are in Gaza, for example. So when it comes to him having any viewpoint, when it comes to anything of relevance to the best interest of Scotland, I absolutely do not feel he has a right to feel he has a space there. When it comes to net zero targets, they have to be bold. It's a target for a reason. It's not a meeting point, and we have to challenge ourselves. And I think that where we've seen really strong leadership, in particular, has been from John Swinney. He has made it very clear that yes, oil and gas is required at this time, but in order for us to meet those net zero goals, any sort of suggestions that have to be made about renewables and from the oil and gas industry, it has to marry up with those targets. And I think that's a really strong position to take. I don't see Tony Blair making those views. I don't see him involved in our decision making processes, and I think that we have to look at the politics he was involved in was full of toxicity, including people that he trusted and relied on. So I think that he needs to get his own house in order before he decides to discuss other factors that do not affect him, but rather than just him, his opinions, and trying to stay relevant in politics, which he's not.
Thank you. And Huw, do you think Tony Blair has any relevance in this day and age?
None whatsoever. It's the fact that he's moved on. In fairness, I lived through the sort of the 90s and 2000s, and things did get better. And I think there were sort of improvements in qualities of life. But then obviously the financial crash in 2008 sort of brought all that to an end globally. But for him to be interviewed, I listened to the interview on Radio 4, and I think Radio 4 were even surprised because the following day the pushback from the audience, just saying why on earth was he being given this platform, and I think people inside that bubble just fail to realise how toxic Blair really is. As Michelle mentioned, not just with the Iraq War, we remember things like PFI, that many sort of local authorities across the UK and Scotland and Wales are still paying off, thanks to his embracing of sort of private funding. But yeah, the fact that he was trying to make out that AI was going to be the going to rescue everything, when his institute has received over £200 million from the AI industry. The cynic in me would suggest that he's stuck his head up above the parapet just to get some attention and to try and do some favours for his funders and backers.
So then, do we know who his funders and backers are? Other than the AI industry, as you said.
I don't know the details, but I've read online articles about where the funding for his institute comes from, and obviously they are it's tech billionaires who are backing a lot of the stuff that he's doing, because he does have a global profile. So he is somebody that if you're looking to sort of go into that sort of sector and trying to promote that business, I can imagine that people would see him as being useful. But remember, this is the guy who also had Mandelson in his cabinet on a couple of occasions.
Thank you. And so, Michelle, do you think Labour is going to listen to any of Tony Blair's ideas or suggestions, or will he just be completely disregarded?
Well, I think Labour at the moment are currently irrelevant. I think this is the big problem, is that they don't have anyone that has any direction, that's offering sound leadership. And so the way of Tony Blair, which I believe and have seen through my lifetime, is a man who had the opportunity to do good and make a real difference, because some of the things that Huw spoke about there were things that did make a big difference, but he's seen an opportunity to cash in on it, and that became his priority. So if there's an opportunity there and Tony Blair can have an opinion about it, and he's able to make some sort of relevance for himself or to cash in on it in other ways, I don't have a hesitation to believe that he would take that opportunity if it presented itself.
Thank you. And now moving on to the Milburn Review. After the publication of the Milburn Review into unemployment of young people, we now await to see if the response is to create hope and aspiration among our people or to implement punitive measures. Would cutting benefits risk further harm to young people's mental health? So, Michelle, you have mentioned that you are by trade a mental health nurse. So then, by cutting benefits, how could this impact young people searching for employment, education or training?
But I think that this is a multi-strand question. I don't think it's as simple as, well, first and foremost, cutting people's benefits when they are struggling and vulnerable is possibly one of the most disgusting actions I think anyone can take. When people are struggling, we need to wrap around them and support them as much as we can. The question isn't about the benefits. This is the problem for me, is about where the discussion points are landing at the moment, and I think it's irresponsible of those in leadership positions to accept that that's where they are. It should be about sort of the infrastructure to support people. So for example, our employment service, which is not devolved, in terms of if you've ever had to go to the job centre, it can be really cruel, it can be really hard. And you see, if you're faced with that sanctioning, the fear of losing the small amounts of money that you are getting through because you can't find a job, or because what you aspire for, let's say for example, you're looking to sort of get a job off the back of uni. Let's say you've been to uni, you've got a specific degree, but there's no opportunities within sort of the net that you're in, and there's not an opportunity for you because you're maybe overqualified. This is something that young people are faced with once they come out of university. So it may be that you're struggling to actually find any employment. Now, I can hear critics saying, oh, well, you should go and find any job whatsoever and do that. And I completely agree that having the infrastructure of daily routine structure does help with your mental health.
Yes.
However, what is also so destroying is if you go into a job where it's you're not treated well, that there's no sense of satisfaction in the work that you're doing. And I'm not going to say any specific type of jobs, because I think that's unfair, because not all industries of specific nature have that. But there are some industries out there that can be really soul destroying, and I can understand that impact on people's mental health can then affect them feeling like they're able to go into good employment opportunities. We need to look at also, how do we offer on-the-job training? So let's say, for example, someone doesn't have a relevant qualification, or maybe education just wasn't the best route for that individual.
No,
is it that we're going to offer apprenticeships? The SNP has made it very clear in our commitment through our manifesto and throughout the election campaign and before that point about the importance of recognising the work that can be done around apprenticeship learning. Our universities, in terms of work experience opportunities, how are we able to get private industry to sort of support universities so that those experiences can be gained through their qualifications, and it means they can hit the ground running if there are opportunities in those industries. But likewise, I think that there's an onus on workplaces also to recognise where the opportunities are. Because if you have someone, and it's great if you have someone who stays with a company, for example, for a long time, and they work their way through, and they've maybe got to a certain position of a managerial responsibility, but where's the opportunities for the people that come behind them? How are we, and how are our workplaces evolving with all the types of things that we've sort of discussed around the impacts of global affairs, the impacts of the AI industry, but also where are the opportunities that are presenting itself? For example, in the care industry that I work in, there's lots of opportunities, but not everyone is suitable to work in a care industry, it's really stressful.
It's complicated.
It's really, really difficult. And just because the job opportunities are there doesn't mean that everyone should be shoved in a direction. That isn't the way that I went about employment. I worked from the minute I got my national insurance card, I started working. I was a waitress for a long time, I've done bar work, you know, I've done a whole array of stuff before I went into care work. And I say that those jobs that I did before that shaped me to be able to have the confidence and maturity to believe that care work was the right decision for me at that time. And I think that young people now at this point in time are not afforded those opportunities. So rather than being focused on that benefit element and saying, well, you know, are we giving too many benefits to young people? I think that that is a bias of not recognising the fail point of what are we doing to listen to young people, to hear about where those struggle points are and how do we best support them through it.
Thank you. And so, Huw, do you think the depiction of this crisis so far has been fair or reliable in favour of young people who are looking for employment, training or education?
No, I think definitely hasn't. I think one of the things that I hear a lot from young people who are struggling to find opportunities is they lack experience, you know, and they can only get experience by having a job. You know, it's sort of a it's a conundrum and it's a challenge. But you know, there isn't like a dearth of jobs out there that that need filling. I know, I'm sure people like Farage thought that they can all go and pick vegetables and strawberries and or whatever. The reality is completely different. That the opportunities that are available at the moment because of the state of the economy. A lot of stuff in the service industry, in catering. Those industries are really struggling at the moment. So they're not recruiting. Because Michelle was saying, getting a bar job. It's much harder now to get even a part-time job. And to think that there is an attitude that young people are all sort of work shy and using mental health as an excuse not to do things. We have to remember a lot of these young people who are coming into the workplace, they lived through COVID. They went through a very strange period in their education, and that is going to have an impact on them. But the opportunities out there, how many people have trained to do jobs, who want to do those jobs, and the opportunities aren't there. We're looking at GPs at the moment being made redundant. When we've got we've got huge issues in the health service in Wales and in Scotland, and yet we can't sort of retain that level of staff. I think we just need to look at it from an economic point of view. We need to sort out the economy and create jobs that are valuable. In Wales, so many areas, especially in the West, are dependent on tourism. They're low paid, seasonal, and there's a big issue, obviously, of young people being able to afford to live in these places. So, I feel really sorry for young people. The opportunities that I had when I was younger, which wasn't that long ago, he says, stroking his white beard, aren't there for them today. But I think a lot of it comes down to the economy, and just look at the harm that Trump is doing to the economy at the moment with his actions in Iran. People go on about, the UK's got the fastest growing economy of the G7. Well, the G7 as a whole is struggling. There are other countries that aren't in the G7 that actually their economies are growing because they've actually, taking practical steps and being creative in the way that they're sort of developing their economies. So yeah, and the fact, that I think there was an element of hoping that, cutting immigration would mean that there's going to be all these jobs for young people to do. Well, the evidence of that doesn't seem to be there at the moment.
Thank you. And Michelle, how do you think the media could fairly portray this, should we call it a crisis of opportunities for young people? As Huw said, it is not very fairly depicted. How can this be improved?
Well, I think that, and Huw's touched it already about sort of the impacts and where the actual responsibility lies. You very seldomly hear about the impact of COVID and how that we're still sort of paying the price from an economic perspective. We had to financially, obviously that was money that nobody was expecting to have to spend as an economy, that, you know, there's still a recovery from that. But also Brexit. No one talks about Brexit, the impact of Brexit, and I guarantee you Reform aren't talking about Brexit, despite that basically all of them are the ones that have been the ones to endorse it. No one taking responsibility. You don't hear Nigel Farage going on about it. You don't hear Boris going on about it since he's disappeared into irrelevance and just doing his private gigs now and from now forward. They have never been interested in the well-being of our nations. They've been interested in their own selfish endeavours. And what we need are people in public life, people like John Swinney, who's leading Scotland, like people like myself who've come in this term, where, you know, our compassion is there at the forefront of everything that we're doing, that we understand the responsibility that we're taking. I know I've come into politics in this level at a time that is really, really difficult, but I don't shy away from that. And that's because I know that I have a strong leader sitting at the helm, where my voice is relevant and will be heard, because I think fresh eyes, this is the other thing, is that, and it does digress slightly from the point, but is that the media got used to dealing with the same politicians all the time, and that's great. Consistency is a good thing. I'm not disputing that for a moment. However, we have a new, fresh intake of parliamentarians in Scotland, where that is fresh eyes, with fresh opportunities for us to look at sort of the way that we go about it. I think that the media needs to do fair reporting in terms of like demonstrating the views of young people through the media, not just sensationalised headlines for clickbait material. I think that it should be quality pieces looking at the day-to-day of what is affecting people, so it holds politicians to greater account. When we are discussing things like, for example, obviously we now have a minister looking at public sector reform. You know, we need to understand how that affects everyone, but in particular young people need to feel value. Obviously the turnout for the election was lower than what it's been for a while, and young people as well. It's always, I mean, I always say young people in politics. I remember being very interested in politics from a young age, and it's not a position that many people would take. As you know, it's not. And I would love. You know, for me, I was a young person's champion as a councillor, and speaking to young people, they ask the most interesting questions. One of the most difficult conversations I actually had on the doorstep during the election was with a young person, because they were completely engaged, because they recognised the strain on decisions. They were asking about, you know, for example, for their home, their house, you know, they were living with their parent, with their parents, and they recognised, they went, well, what the SNP looking to do for me for my house? And obviously I explained about, you know, as we've seen with the First Homes Effect, is that we're going to be given the, you know, £10,000 support for people to get onto the housing market for first-time buyers. So I appreciate that economic outcomes at the moment are difficult, and they are worse than what we had to deal with. And I would go back when I was a kid and say that we had it tough in comparison to the generation before us. We have to recognise that our insight for what young people are going through now needs to help lead us to make better, stronger decisions, but bringing young people along with us when we're making those decisions.
Thank you, Michelle. And so, Huw, with the reduction of entry-level jobs, as the CEO of Next, I believe, mentioned this, do you think this could call for restrictions on the AI industry?
It's very difficult to put restrictions on that. I think what's interesting, you know, there are certain things that, you know, AI can help with, and obviously it clearly has some benefits, but it will have an impact on some jobs. But I think what people may be, you know, forgetting, it's not just AI, it's robotics. So, for example, I was talking about, you know, picking fruit earlier. You know, picking strawberries now. A lot of that is done by robots, because, you know, they work 24 hours a day, and they're very good at, you know, sort of recognizing, you know, what is a good strawberry and is a bad strawberry or whatever. So there's a lot of that kind of technology coming in as well that is, you know, having an impact on the workplace. But, you know, AI as a tool, you know, has benefits and can be used. But what it should be is allowing people to work better, you know, to be able to do their jobs, you know, more easily. But obviously some companies, and, you know, well, lots of companies, for them, at the end of the day, it's all about making money. And when you see companies trying to save money, it usually involves getting rid of staff. So they're looking at ways of reducing their headcounts, because obviously fewer people they employ, the less money is going out of their coffers. So I think we need to look at not just AI, but just at the economy as a whole. It's very extractive. When you see now that the amount of wealth is in the hands of such a small group of people, and it's unbelievable. Why do billionaires need more billions? There's only so much you can spend money on, and to improve your life. But they're basically taking that money out of the economy that could be in people's pockets, that could be doing good, and it's just sitting in bank accounts, or it's. I think we just need to look at the economy as in the round, and look at a different kind of economics.
Thank you, Huw. And moving on to the IndieRef vote. In the first debate of the new Scottish Parliament session, the Parliament overwhelmingly backed a motion for a Section 30 order to hold an independence referendum, should Westminster agree. So the vote was majorly in favour of an independence referendum, but Westminster refused. So how could Westminster possibly justify vetoing this decision when it is very clear that the Parliament was in favour?
This was sadly not unsurprising. To see the outcome. I was really privileged to take part in the debate. That was my first speech, and I stand by the comments that I made, which is Westminster's only main interest is Westminster. It's about protection of that institution and the way that exists. The Section 30 order, and granting that, given that the Scottish opinion has changed, of which a majority of people, even an opinion poll point, yes, it varies and fluctuates to the 50% marker, but it has been consistently above 50% for a significant period of time now. Whereas if you remember back to when Section 30 order the last time was granted, it was to some extent, the independence supporting nation wasn't necessarily there at that point. It was a start point. 2012. So you're talking at really sort of anywhere variable. Now this is from conversation point off the top of my head, but people that I know that campaigned during that initial start point before the Section 30 order went ahead said that you could poll anywhere between 15% to 30% in terms of that. Where are we starting from? Where are we starting from to get people there? So fast forward, we have the independence referendum in 2014, of which we just fall just slightly short. However, we have consistently since 2014 to date, that has been rising, even through the difficulties of Brexit, COVID. Look through all the international issues that we have. We've touched point discussion on the economy there today as well. Despite that, independence and support for being an independent nation is consistently hitting over the 50% marker. That's a threat. That's a threat to Westminster. So them turning around and saying, no, you can't have your Section 30 order. However, that isn't the end of the story. So they are wrong to not grant it. But look at sort of where things are from a State of the Union. We have pro-independence for each nation sitting at the helm of each nation. So it's not the same picture as where we were. Politics have moved forward, and given that Labour in the position of government at the moment is, to describe it as a sugly peg is me being polite this afternoon. The leadership contest that's coming their way is going to be messy. I think that some of the people that have put their name forward, making very bold expressions about Scotland basically getting back in its box, will not be forgiven again. I was out campaigning in the most recent general election in which people voted for change. They voted for change of getting rid of the Conservatives out of government, but so it wasn't an anti-SNP vote up here. It was about getting the Tories out. That was what we heard on the doorstep. And this was with people who, they thought that they worked really hard, and they did. I'm biased because I campaigned for Gavin Newlands, who was a really, really strong local advocate and really good in Westminster as well in terms of the contributions that he made. But people said, Gav's great, but this is the problems that we need to get the Tories out. And that was, we've seen that message sort of across the whole nation. So when it comes to denying people of Scotland the right to choose, Scotland does not look favourably on that. They will, at the next general election, I have every faith that those votes are coming back to the SNP. And the reason for that is because the SNP has shown strong leadership. John Swinney has made it very clear that this is a start point, this is not an end point. So it'd be a case of watch this space, because, and this is where I also said about new contributors to the Parliament. We have come in and we have fire in our belly, and we are not there to sit down and shut up. We're there to represent, and we're there for the progress, and they will be held to account for the way that they behave and for denying the democracy of Scotland.
Thank you, Michelle. And Huw, do you believe that the leadership conflict, we'll call it, within the Labour Party has pushed them towards denying this Section 30 order, as they think it will be biting off more than it can chew?
It's quite interesting, because obviously you've got a Labour Party at a UK level that is in a mess. You've got the likelihood of, if Andy Burnham wins in Makerfield, there'll be a leadership contest, and we could well have Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister before the end of the year. But Burnham is somebody who, has operated within a devolved situation as Mayor of Manchester. It's quite ironic that as the Mayor of Manchester, he has more control and responsibility over policing than the Welsh Government has. Mm-hmm. So at least then you would have somebody sort of leading Labour who realises the desire for devolution and for more powers. But I just find it's just all very condescending and patronising. It's just this, we know better than you. And it's just basically just bully boy tactics, isn't it? The fact that 84% of the population live in England gives them the numbers that they can force these things on people, and yet they won't recognise, that, they're still trying to make a claim that, that we're stronger together, that it's but I keep asking people, what are the benefits of Wales and Scotland being in the Union? Nobody can ever come back with any saleable points. I think from a Welsh perspective, it's interesting, between Plaid Cymru and the Greens, I've got 43% of the population voted for parties who support independence, although Plaid made a big point of that this, wasn't about independence, and it isn't top of the list, but they still say, quite clearly that independence is the long-term goal. And I think the other thing that's interesting is looking at young people's views and opinions. Younger people under 25s are far more in favour of independence. And I think one of the things that's driving people in Wales, to a certain extent, is the fear that, that England could vote in a reform government. And can you imagine what that would do for Wales and Scotland? It would be an unmitigated disaster. We'd just be spending all our time putting Union Jack flags up. Just for example, what Reform have done in opposition in the Senedd since they had their members elected a couple of weeks back. They wanted to take down the flag of Ukraine that is flying outside the Senedd and replace it with a Union Jack. That's the level of politics that we're dealing with Reform, and it is terrifying that that we could have a UK government led by Nigel Farage, because the mess that Starmer's made of being Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And moving on to energy policy. As Ofgem announced an increase in the energy price cap this week, the Scottish Parliament voted for powers over energy policy to be devolved. So, Michelle, do you think it is likely that Westminster will grant this motion to give Scotland the power to decide its own energy policy?
Well, it's about them putting it right. The thing is that they said, and this sort of links back to what we have just spoke about in terms of independence. And obviously in the press in recent weeks talk about devolving more opportunities for Scotland, Diva Max type mentality. Obviously I'm not in favour of Diva Max, but anything that allows for us to have another opportunity to better do things for Scotland has to be welcomed. But it has to be that we're able to have control of all the elements. That's why independence is the answer, because we need to be able to do that longevity planning and sort of financing and everything that comes with it. We need to, it's not just enough to have control of energy, we also need to be able to have sort of a long-term plan around these things that best supports our own policies for everyone, because there's such variant across the country at the moment. With energy costs, the debate that took place, once again, I would ask viewers, please go listen to the debate, because you will see the indifference to the people of Scotland. Many members giving really good contributions, in particular Alan Brown, absolutely superb. He's like a guru around energy. He had some really wonderful contributions when he was in Westminster, and he's going to be really good for the Scottish Parliament as well. But when it came to the actual policy itself, yes, they should be granting it to Scotland for all the reasons that has been said, that it's all very well that we have the energy, we don't have the power, and that means that our bills are outrageously priced, and it's us as a nation, as the Scottish people, that are paying the cost of that. It's so morally wrong, so financially wrong. It's just completely unfair, and I think that this is why the SNP have been voted back into government after 19 years, is because it's recognised that the SNP understand where Scotland needs to have strong voices to represent them in order to get the action, and put the pressure on Westminster to make sure that they do respond in a way that best serves us.
Thank you. And so, Huw, as we know, Westminster has recently vetoed a Section 30 order which would grant an independence referendum. So do you think, as I just asked Michelle, do you think they will grant devolution to energy policy, which would thereby give Scotland more power over its decisions?
Yeah, Wales is exactly the same boat. I think there are devolved competencies, but it's only up to a certain level of sort of megawatts or whatever. I don't understand, but basically it just means that larger scale infrastructure stuff isn't devolved. And in Wales, remember, we don't have the devolution of the Crown Estate, which means that any developments are being done now with offshore, means that the money potentially from that goes to the Crown and to the central government rather than to Wales. Wales, like Scotland, are net exporters. I think we export 70% more energy out of Wales than we actually consume. However, the majority of the energy that is created in Wales at the moment, over 50%, comes from gas-fired power stations. So, we've got a way to go to sort of replace that with renewables. But it's crazy, that in Wales and Scotland have the highest energy bills, and yet we're sending energy to England to keep the bills down there. But this is an example of how the union benefits England but doesn't benefit Wales and Scotland. If there was a benefit, you would say, well, in fairness, right, you're generating this energy, therefore you should be having sort of lower bills. But it doesn't work like that, does it?
Thank you. And so there has recently been a push for nuclear energy as a renewable. Do you think that is viable in comparison to the solar and wind energy the UK already has?
No, because in Scotland we have decommissioning sites. In one of my roles as a councillor, I chaired the committee on Scottish Council's Committee on Radioactive Substances. I participated in the CPG, which I might add was cross-party, including those for the union that accept that Scotland is in a position of decommissioning, of which we need specialist jobs, and it links back to all the conversations we've had today. We need good, strong jobs in decommissioning, because there's a lot of work to be done there as well. So where Scotland is in that journey is not where England is on that journey at this time. That isn't new. I think that it's disingenuous of politicians in particular in Reform, who expressed some really strong viewpoints in the chamber in the past week, where they don't understand. This is the things that this also goes back to the point about media reporting as well, is it needs to be that we are focused on sort of what have we been discussing, what policies are in place, and what actions are we taking to best make sure that those are in the best interest of the people of Scotland. That decommissioning effort is where it is. Reform giving bellyaches about what they think their opinion is about something does not mean that that's the work of what the Parliament has been doing already, or what is the direction for Scotland. And I think that it's a huge disrespect to the people of Scotland to not recognise what needs to be done next, which is that focus on renewables, which the SNP and government has been completely focused on. Wind, tidal, for example, absolutely sensational bits of work that have been done. But we also need to, and this goes back to the same point that Huw's making about what is the benefit of being in the union. It doesn't work because we're not reaping the benefit from those measures that we've put those investment pieces in. And that's what we need to see more direction on. That's what we need the media to be scrutinising and making the case for, be for or against. I'm not against sort of debating these matters, but that's where the focus needs to be on what matters to people and their bills.
Thank you. And so then with Labour's infrastructure bill that would push for nuclear energy in Scotland as well, would the devolution of energy policy be able to prevent that from happening in Scotland?
Well, I hope so. That's the answer. I hope so. But we'll have to wait and see. This is obviously a live issue, and we'll have to see what debates come forward. But I do know that it will be strong representation that will be had from the SNP on the matter.
Thank you. And so, Huw, in Wales, what is public opinion on nuclear energy like? Do they support nuclear energy as a renewable, or solar or wind instead?
It's a bit of a hot potato, because obviously what we have in Wales, we had 2 nuclear power stations, one in Trawsfynydd in northwest Wales, and one on Ynys Môn, the Isle of Anglesey. So the small modular reactors are proposed to be put on the site of Wilva on Ynys Môn. The polite policy is to support existing projects, but not new projects. And I think it's one of those that has been an issue for Plaid, obviously, because nuclear's been on Ynys Môn for several years, and it's obviously one of the it's where the First Minister lives. So I think in general, I think people are against it. The small modular reactors, it's an untested technology that nobody knows much about. And whatever the situation is with nuclear, the risks are huge, as we've seen, in Fukushima and in Chernobyl. So, personally, no. We should be looking at wind, solar, and as Michelle was saying, sort of tidal. That's another example. The Severn estuary is one of the, I think, is the largest sort of tidal sort of difference as a location in the whole of the world. So proposal put in to build a
Oh, I think you've frozen there, Huw. We'll try to get you back there just when we can. Okay. Well, yes. So Michelle, if energy policy is devolved to Scotland and it has control over it, how long do you think it could take for this to be implemented and processed?
I think that's a difficult thing for me to be able to say today, to be honest, because we need to see what that looks like. What is the agreement that will be in place? Is it going to be fully devolved? Is it in part again? Is it going to be piecemeal, or is it that it's going to be what we're asking for? But what I do have every confidence in is obviously we have a new Minister for Energy, and Stephen Gethins, who is very competent. He's hit the ground running, and he's made it very clear that he wants to make sure that we do it as soon as possible to make sure that it benefits the people of Scotland.
Thank you. And then so with this further development in... Oh, hello, Huw. There you are.
All right.
So then with this development in energy policy, do you have anything else that you'd like to input?
Well, as a backbencher, I'm hoping that there'll be plenty of opportunity for me to input. But I think that we have to look at sort of energy also includes waste management. So we need to look at sort of how we deal with, like I said, we've got decommissioning sites. We need to look at how we manage that waste, which is always I think it's always a hot topic in terms of obviously movement of sort of substances that are radioactive, transport of those things, but also energy in general. How, what is the benefit? What is the lifetime of the renewables that we're looking at as well? And how do we deal with storage of power and energy? So there's so many aspects to this that need careful thought and input. I'm certain that in particular, and I know that I've been top heavy in saying it, but the fact is that I feel as a backbencher, I feel empowered by the government that we have, because I know that my voice and contributions are valid, and I feel that that will be the same for all backbenchers that want to engage in a collaborative approach to constructive conversation. I believe that that door is wide open, not just with the government minister, but with the SNP and government as a whole.
Thank you. And so, Huw, with Wales and the Senedd, do you think there will be calls for energy policy devolution soon, or do you think the Senedd will want to have other powers devolved first?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a challenge because Plaid have been they've gone from being a small party in opposition, with a dozen Senedd members, to being in government with over 40 members. So and Plaid have said their priorities in the first 100 days are to look at health and education, because those are the two devolved competencies that have the majority of the funding, and they've got challenges facing them. But when you look across the board, it's one of the things that Plaid has been discussing is the need for more powers, because the lack of powers means that the Senedd can't do what potentially it could do. And I think people are frustrated, as to what a Welsh government can achieve and can do. But obviously you've got the Conservatives in Reform, saying, oh, we're not going to support anything around, more powers, focus on the day job, which is completely disingenuous, because either they willingly misunderstand, why you need more powers in order to sort of deliver better government. But it is something that, that Wales is doing, and it's something that Rhyn ap Iorwerth, as First Minister, has already discussed with Keir Starmer on the phone, that we need more devolution. We need the devolution of policing, and the legal system. We're so far behind Scotland at the moment. That's why independence is on more of a back burner, because we need to build that capacity within Wales to be able to manage and deliver things. And one of the big issues in Wales is the lack of financial levers that we have. The inability to borrow money and to raise taxes. We have got some tax raising powers, but it is limited. We don't have any controls over benefits. So there's lots of things, but obviously with Plaid coming into power for the first time, and I think what people are expecting from them is to first of all sort out the health service, because that is the number one priority. But it is something that the Plaid are going to be looking at is, from a constitutional point of view, it just, in order for Wales to function better, it needs more powers.
Thank you. So, well, that is it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guests, Michelle Campbell.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Huw Marshall.
Thank you. Diolch.
Goodbye, and thank you for watching.